Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Together We Learn. Together We Learn started off as an internal learning activity for our own team members to learn and understand the world of economics and finance. These episodes are going to be for 20 to 30 minutes so that you guys can understand, comment, and ask your questions so that our experts ranging from chartered accountant to accountants to financial advisors will be able to help you with the right answers. So today's topic is very interesting. It's a topic that is going to bring a lot of uncertainty in the future because of how geopolitics is changing in this ecosystem. So for instance, what's happening between China and Taiwan. And I'll tell you more about it when I talk to you about the topic. But one important thing that you have to realize is that these things are all something that we are trying to bring you the knowledge so that you have an understanding on how the impact would be if a worst case scenario happens in our planet, right? To start off with, I would like to introduce what Vite is. Vite is a financial wellness platform wherein we want to give people an opportunity to be informed before they start taking financial decisions. And while you are trying to be informed, we will help you with our experts who will give you the information, the knowledge, the right direction for you to take. So rather than you blindly taking it, you have data-driven approaches and suggestions given by our algorithm and our team to take that final call. All right. So today's topic is about the indispensable role of semiconductors in our global economy and how it has an impact in fintech and in tech in general, right? And that's where we're going to talk about. That's the important topic that I was talking about. So if we start off, what are semiconductors? For people who aren't aware of it, semiconductors are there in every single device, right? The laptop that you see on your screen, the phones that you're using, if you're watching this, anything and everything has semiconductors inside them, right? Semiconductors is nothing but it was a material which had both insulating, which means it won't let current pass through, as well as non-insulating properties, which means it will let current pass through, and which is very rare, right? So that is how semiconductors got that. And why is this insulating and non-insulating properties very important? Because computers work on zeros and ones, right? So 0 is when there is no current and 1 is when there is current, right? And this is how the computers start giving information from everything that you see around. And one of the major components or manufacturing units of semiconductor is silicon. There are other materials that are also used like germanium, etc. But silicon is a very primary material that is being used in this particular semiconductor. So let's just take an example of the applications that you see here. I gave you an example of the camera, the laptop, the phones that you have. But the very important thing is that, let's just say the razor, the shaving razor that you would have, has silicon in them. Why? Because it controls the speed, because it controls current that passes through it. More current means the motor will run faster, less current means it will run slower. Similarly, even the small toy phone as kids, when we used to have the nostalgic feeling of hearing Duma Chale when you click a number, right? When you click the number, only when you click the current passes through, and it tells to activate this particular song in its board. And these boards are made of semiconductors, right? So it's very important, from these small items to even bigger ones like car motors. When you're accelerating, it gives a signal that it needs to go faster, right? To even the defense missiles and let's just say rockets that are being sent to space. Every single thing has semiconductors in them, and hence it plays a large role in the global economy. All right. So now history behind this. It was invented, the first transistors. Transistors are nothing but a combination of resistors. We would have learned in 9th standard science. Capacitors, diodes and transistors. Like these transistors are made of these different things, right? Transistors are also one of these components, right? So these transistors are made of these silicon chips, silicon material, which ends up being part of your semiconductor board that you see. So this was found this was invented by John, Walter, and William in the year 1947. If you remember, it's the year when we got independence. That's the same year that this transistor was invented. And this was replacing something called as vacuum tubes. Vacuum tubes are nothing but the properties of vacuum. So we all know that, we were all learned that vacuum, when there is no air, current does not pass through it. And when there is air, current does pass through it, right? And earlier electronic items, let's just say like fridge before 1947, etc., used vacuum tubes, right? There are amazing pictures of that on Google. You can always go ahead and look at that. And what they found through these transistors, that they could make them smaller, consume less power, and has greater reliability, right? That means you can control the current. It does not get like short circuited faster. These were the reasons why these three individuals, John, Walter, and William, got the Nobel Prize, right? From there, almost 11 years later, which is 1958, that's when the first IC, which is nothing but integrated circuits, right? Anyone who's watching who's from EEE background would know what an integrated circuit is. And anyone else who does not know, anything that you see inside the remote, if you rip apart a remote, you will see a green color board with a lot of dots and something standing up, a black color thing. So these are basically integrated circuits. Integrated circuits are a combination of these transistors, capacitors, resistors, diodes, etc. Right? So they make these boards so that these boards can communicate with each other to get the job done for us. Right? So there was a rapid increase in complexity and functionality because people wanted smaller boards for smaller instruments. Their computing capacity, the way they can be used, was so large that it became a very important part of our lives. So that's how memory chips, which is nothing but on the camera or on your phone, there are memories. These are all made of memory chips. Their job is to just store memory. But again, these storing happens through these components that are made out of the semiconductor, like for instance, silicon. Similarly, microprocessors, system on chips, which is nothing but like the ones that you see in Intel, etc., right? These played a major role in innovation, and people started using them to make more advanced computing products out there, from electronics to different systems, right? So for us, one thing that you remember is there is something called as Moore's law, which stated that the growth of computing becomes larger when there are more chips or transistors in the chip, right? More the transistors, more the computing power. And according to Moore's law, the number doubles. The number of transistors in a chip doubles every 2 years once. And now the interesting thing, like I'll talk to you more about what is happening. There's challenges now in the recent years is that it is the number of chips that you can have in that small board is reaching its limit, right? So now people are thinking about what are the other ways in which can we do this so that we have more and more computing power, right? So it's now they're switching their entire thing into 3D chip stacking, looking for new materials and alternative like computing architectures, right? So that one chip over another, how can they communicate? Make sure that the computation does not get disrupted, but it's seamless. These are the things that people are talking about. I'm not going to get into these details because we're going to talk about the economics behind it and the financial implication that it would have. So maybe for another day, we'll talk about these things. But you need to understand that it started from vacuum tube computers, which were like super big. When I say big, it would be like huge rooms size worth computers, to transistor-based computers, which is after 1958, like I said. Then it moved into the first hard disk, which was created by IBM, which was just for 5 MB. But if you guys know what a Tata Ace is, that hard disk was, if you have to transport it, you need a Tata Ace to transport that 5 MB, right? And today we're sitting at Samsung's 4 TB worth memory chip, which is of this small size, right? That's how the whole ecosystem evolved in the last almost like almost 75, 80 years. Now, one of the important trivia that I want to say is, if you guys want to guess, right, please go ahead and do it on the comments before I give you the answers. Apple released their Apple M2 chip, which is a chip that they created. How many transistors do you think that chip has? Right? Is it 10 million, 20 million, 1 billion, 2 billion? Guess what? The answer is it had 20 billion transistors, 20 billion, right? And that's the reason why Apple products computation skills are way higher. And if you remember, if you've seen some tech geeks talk about this on their tech platforms, on tech YouTube channels, you will realize that these tech gurus would have told you that Apple's strength came in because they created a chip which will complement their software. And I'll tell you why this is very, very important, because in geopolitics, there's a huge monopoly or a relationship that is happening, which you would have heard on multiple channels like First Post and Times Now and other places, right? So these chips make a very major role. And in coming to the implications of this in tech and in fintech world, so if I talk about data processing, right? Think about a world where if I was doing trading, I have to look at my screen or I have to look at my laptop to get the answers on a regular basis to take calls, right? But now there is something called as algorithmic trading, which is nothing but you would pre-program as to how the trade should happen. So whatever the human eye might miss out when we blink or when we sleep, the system will be able to understand and start trading. And that's a huge industry right now where people are trying multiple things there. Then apart from that, there's also something called as high frequency trading, right? It is nothing but trading on an everyday basis. So difference between algorithmic trading and high frequency trading is the mindset with which the customers would come into it. For instance, algorithmic trading is nothing but when you are looking for returns in the long term, right? The system does do its job, but it does not expect you to do high frequency, which is every day. Typically, high frequency trading is same pre-programming, but it happens day in, day out. Like you buy and sell on the same day, so you can book profits, right? So that is how. So for these computations, what you need, when I use the word computation, you need semiconductors, you need those transistors, you need those chips with these transistors on them, right? And apart from this, digital banking and mobile banking, to make sure that the chips are more secure, right? You need to have more protocols layered on it. So these are the places. Similarly, digital wallets, contactless payments. The use case in the fintech on the financial services world is massive. And in general, with technology, let's take an example of blockchain, right? The mining concept where you have to mine and give that computational power is done through these chips. And if you remember, anyone who's mined, you know that you were all running behind GUI, graphic user interface, right? Graphic cards. So that is something that you need to realize. Everything around in our world revolves around these things. Now, the impact on the global economy, I'll tell you the size of it. The entire market value of the semiconductor world, the global semiconductor world, is 500 billion in 2021, right? And it's supposed to compound with an annual growth rate of 5 to 7%. That is what is expected, right? And one of the key players who contributes to this growth is automotive, cars, let's just say Tesla, even our normal cars, and consumer electronics, our phones. We all know that we all have multiple phones, and we all love buying phones every 1 year once. So then industrial, like for example, when I say industrial, like for example, for us to make chips, they can't have humans doing the packing. Now they have machines who are doing it. So to program these machines, you need these semiconductors. And finally, telecommunication, whether it's between our phones to another for these towers, or from moon to earth, from satellites there to earth, everything requires this. And that's the reason why this sector is growing at 5 to 7% CAGR. Right, and they are proposing that it will grow even more because of Internet of Things, IoT, AI. We all know about ChatGPT. That's the only thing that's been happening in the news. People are talking about it day in and day out. And 5G. Right, for all of these things, you need high computation, lesser power, which means better chips, right? So that is the impact that this has on the global economy, right? Now, what happened in the last 2 years was there was a huge shortage because of supply chain issues, as well as in general shortage because people were not fabricating them. And the reason why I'm using the word fabrication is because these microchips can't be fabricated in a normal factory. They need to have a very high standard factory levels. I'll talk about that very soon. So what happened is during the pandemic time, there was disruption where because of these supply chain disruptions and manufacturing disruption or fabrication disruption, there was a surge in demand, right? So what happened is the foundries or fabrication units, which are called fabs, were less in capacity. They're very less because they're very high investment. I'll talk about those criterias as well. And it's mainly concentrated in Asia, which is where COVID kind of originated, right? So because of that, they were closed. So the lead time started increasing. There were complex production processes, which means you need skilled laborers to come into the fabrication units or fabs to actually get the job done. And finally, there was production delays, there were price increases, availability of products, everything was coming together, and it was creating like a perfect storm in the last 2 years. And I'll tell you how this impacted a person like me and my team members themselves. So let's take an example of let's first take the global example of big companies and how it affected them. So if you take Apple's losses were at $6 billion because of this, their impact, right? So similarly, Maruti Suzuki had to cut their production by 60%, which means if in a month they were making 100 cars, they only were making 40, right? And even though they cut down on the production, the demand was still there, because people did stop, but then they restarted buying it, but there was no enough chips or semiconductors to circulate around and build these products. Similarly, Mahindra cut their costs by 25%. Sony was short on PS5s. All gamers out there would know that there were more reselling happening rather than buying new PS5s because they were not in the market. And finally, the automotive industry, the car industry overall lost around $100 billion, which is a lot of money in the last 2 years, right? So now the reasons why I said I'll start the global thing is I can tell you our personal experience. Someone that I knew who was running an IoT development center. They used to buy chips for creating their IoT products from Gujarat. But now, because in Gujarat, they started saying that if you place an order in 2021, you will get it like fulfilled in 2023, which is like almost 2 years waiting time. So what they had to do was they had to go to Taiwan directly. And this is the first time I'm using the word Taiwan because Taiwan is the leading manufacturer of in the semiconductor industry, right? They make these microchips. So when you had to go there, the problem was it was more expensive. So you had to pay 2 to 3 times more than what you had to pay here. But people had no choice because they had to get these products out because consumers were waiting to buy them, right? Apart from this, a personal experience from our CTO's side. So Vishwanath was planning to buy a laptop which was worth 70,000, which was like a ThinkPad before the pandemic. After the pandemic, within a year, those rates became 90,000 to 1.1 lakhs. Why? Because of the shortage that you're seeing here, because these laptops are made of semiconductors. Now, major reasons, like I said, was factory shutdown, supply chain disruption, shift in demand, wherein people thought that when everyone went into remote work, they weren't prepared for the amount of gadget usage that would come, amount of laptops and home supplies that people would need. All of this like kind of quadrupled during the time of the pandemic. And inventory mismanagement, wherein they thought there would be drop, it was true, but it was only for a very small span of time. So immediately when it came up, they were not prepared or they didn't have their production lines active. So there was huge inventory mismanagement. And finally, the concentration of production. Most of these fabrication units are situated in Taiwan and in Asian regions like South Korea, Taiwan, China, etc. And these were the places where they were complete shutdown because of the pandemic. And this is how that impact kind of became like a massive one. Now, your question would be, why can't these fabs be created in other places? First, it's very, very expensive. The minimum investment that you need to set up a fab is 1 billion. And the analysts say that 3 billion is not a big deal at all. And I'll tell you why. Because apart from setting it up, you need skilled labor, right? You can't have people who are not aware of it, because you're working with very minute transistors. Like I said, if M2 chip has 20 billion transistors, someone has to design it, and the designer needs to be very, very skilled at it, right? And the advanced equipment that you need to kind of bring this into that small chip, it is not like a very small equipment. It's all very advanced equipment. And apart from this, you need like stable and reliable supply, like power supply. Just like how you would have noticed, if a production unit's current gets cut off, to restart it, it takes more money, right? So that's very important. Now, I mean, I've just said 4 things, and you might be feeling overwhelmed. Oh my God, it's very difficult to set up fabs. But there are more. For instance, one of the primary reasons why people find it difficult, especially in India, we might be struggling a lot, mainly because of the clean room environment, right? So you can't have nanoparticles or microparticles of dust, because if it goes and sits between, right, then it will create issues on the chip. So to keep it sterilized and protected is a huge expense. Apart from this, there is intellectual property protection, because not everyone has design, like they have design property, or they don't have intellectual property on design. Countries like US has high stakes in that. So typically, this is where the geopolitics happens between US and Taiwan, where US and Taiwan have a relationship where US designs it, Taiwan manufactures it, right? So that is how their relationship's happening now. And that's the reason why China being involved is creating a lot of issues or confusion. So having US and Taiwan be involved like this in the geopolitical situation basically creates a lot of dependencies on these two countries. And India as a country has taken few steps, right? I'll talk about these steps. But apart from this, the European countries also want to be self-sufficient. They don't want to be under the market stress. So they want to have more of the market presence. Now, apart from this, the other strategy that people are looking at is acquiring or mergers, so that you don't do it on your own. Typically, this industry works where different parts are done in different places. For example, design happens in the US, the manufacturing of the chips happen in Taiwan or one of these Asian countries, like South Korea is also a huge player. But the raw materials come from China. Silicon's largest silicon supplier is China. Then assembly happens in India. For instance, if you know, Apple's phones are assembled in India, and Tim Cook did say that he wants to increase it to 50% in the next 4 to 5 years, if I'm not mistaken. So these are the ways in which the political implications, geopolitical implications are there. Now, when it comes to why there is huge tension is because of national security reasons, right? They're very important for infrastructure. When I say infrastructure, if you have to compute something for your country, you need these chips, and that's very important. Similarly, cyber attacks. So if the cyber attacks are happening, then you need these chips to be available for you to protect your country, right? Similarly, these cyber attacks are not just cyber attacks, normal attacks. So if you want to have deterrent missiles, right, or hypersonic missiles, so the country which has more chips is equivalent to more powerful in the defense side, or in defense spending, or in weaponry in general, right? So these are the reasons why it became very important. So government started giving incentive. They started saying that they need to increase their productions, have more of these factories, or be involved in the supply chain of semiconductors. So in India, some major thing happened recently where they wanted to break the monopoly. And I'll talk about the monopoly first. The monopoly of foundries is with TSMC, which is nothing but Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, which has over 70% stake, or over 70% production happens there because they have more number of fabs, right? Now, similarly, this is a monopoly by them. But if you look down, for example, memory chips, right? These are component. Like once these semiconductors are created into transistors and chips, memory chips are created, and the market leaders in that are Samsung, Micron, SK Hynix. These are the companies who concentrate on memory chips, right? These are the monopolies that are happening there. Then when you come to microprocessors, it's Intel and AMD, right? Intel, i5, i9, all of that. And then AMD, and now Apple's also come up with their M1 and M2 chips, right? Now, similarly, GPUs, which is graphic processing units, right? So Nvidia and AMD are the major players in that. So we know that Nvidia supplies most of the gaming equipments, and they're super powerful. I've also learned that companies like AWS and others use Nvidia hard disks to run their cloud computing technology, right? Now, similarly, when it comes to mobile processors, half of the world runs on Qualcomm, right? Apart from the Apple ones, every Android phone, if you see, you will see Snapdragon, right? These are the ones that I told you, system on chip, which is basically run by, there's a monopoly by Qualcomm. So to start breaking these monopolies, because none of these companies that you heard now, I was about to say most of these, but actually none of these companies that you heard of are actually in India, or we have to actually take more imports in. So that's where, if you look at the data, I'm going to show that to you now. In India, the exports is only 425 million, whereas the imports of this is over like 10,000 million, right? Which is a huge amount. So this is where India wants to reduce this dependency, the global domination, which is being held by Taiwan, China, South Korea, and the others in this is very, very small, right? And we fall under that others category now. So we want to be better at it, and India has a master plan to get away from the semiconductor crisis. And why is the semiconductor crisis being called? Because there is so much of happening. There is a sense of a pseudo war that is already happening, or like the war is already on between China and Taiwan, where they are flexing their military muscle along with US. So if that escalates, we will all be in trouble. So that's where India wants to take actions, and that's how the cabinet approved something called as ISM, which is India Semiconductor Mission. India started giving out incentives of 230,000 crores so that we can start building semiconductors at the foundational level itself, right? And they approved multiple companies to go ahead and do this. For example, there's news about what's the company called? Tata, who's getting into semiconductor. They want to start manufacturing, right? Foxconn has decided to invest more in India so that they can manufacture more of those iPhones out. So these kind of things are happening because of the cabinet's decision to start looking at production from India itself, right? So now the future of semiconductor, after all of this comes in, there are two major things, which one is quantum computing, right? Which is going to be a game changer where you can compute at supersonic speeds. Sorry for exaggerating, but I'm saying it's super, super fast. And apart from that, artificial intelligence and machine learning or deep learning, right? These are the other places where semiconductors will play a major, major role, right? And these roles in fintech will also be very, very drastic, or it'll have a huge impact, because finance is something that is evergreen and it is there. Every single person has to manage it. Every single person has a bank account. And more or less, there is also going to be more dependence on green ways of having semiconductors, or strategic investments and partnerships. For instance, how US is trying to have some relationship with India to make sure that they give us the R&D and then we also help them with development, right? So because they want to move away from Taiwan as well as a strategic move. So this is the whole overall geopolitics situation and the economics behind semiconductors. And I hope you love this session. The next one is going to be even more interesting. I'm not going to tell you the topic, but you can also share what you love. If you have any comments or feedback, please do throw it down there. And we are trying out a new format. So please do bear with us till we get perfect in that. Thank you and have a lovely weekend.